Hey there, friends. My name's Jim, and today I'd like to talk about Dave Rubin. Wait. I know just from hearing his name, most of you are probably ready to click off, but I really wanted to give him a chance, so I actually bought a ticket and went to see his live show in my home state of Florida. Now, I've always gotten a bit of a weird vibe from these kind of GOP incorporated types. You know, the people who get pushed into your face by legacy media like Fox News, and touted as some core sort of genius of public policy and conservatism when they only really give the most light and PC-friendly so-called right-wing takes that there are. Dave Rubin is a perfect example of this, getting famous from riding the coattails of Jordan Peterson and being considered one of the good libs who would really consider arguments and change his stance instead of just screaming and shutting down the conversation altogether, which was certainly a breath of fresh air back then. Well, we're in a different era now, and seeing as he'll be living in my state of Florida and pushing policy in my cities, it's high time he understands what actual conservatives have to say. Not the pundits and yes men that he surrounds himself with, but the real salt of the earth people who, by his own admission at the show that I watched, have been doing such an amazing job keeping Florida a bastion of freedom against the tyranny of people who he himself used to support.
Moving up her head? How is that possible? How is that? I mean, I've seen some weird stuff. With all due respect, ladies in West Palm, I've seen some weird work. When I brought DeSantis on stage, I just looked at him and I went, gay! And nobody cares anymore. Gay people don't care if they're gay anymore. My husband's gay. I don't give a shit. Is there any lesbians here? Jesus, that one went into the void. Why'd you point at him? He's a lesbian. I'm not a biologist. I think he's a...
So let's begin at the beginning. For those of you who don't know, Dave Rubin is a political pundit and commentator who cut his teeth on the Young Turks network. Yeah, that Young Turks. One of the largest progressive and far-left news commentary shows in the world. Before he got into that, he ran a couple of LGBT-themed talk shows, which makes sense considering that he's a man married to another man. Now, I mean to be fair here, and yes, this is kind of funny, but we all have a political past, and very few of us started out where we are now. I do, however, that this is important to give you this context in order for my criticisms to make a bit more sense. So in 2015, he claims to have had a change of heart from a lot of the nonsense that was happening back then. Specifically, Jank getting a little bit more unhinged along with the Ben Affleck, Sam Harris, Bill Maher interview on Islamophobia, and the Charlie Hebdo cartoon shooting. Personally, when this happened, I found it really refreshing. I was much more libertarian back then, and just seeing someone who would take time to think about the criticisms given to them is legitimately all we asked for. Rubin was a liberal man who was married to another man, but he was always upfront about his beliefs and didn't hide behind them trying to cancel people who disagreed, and that on its own is pretty admirable. As nice as that was, the show I went to see may have been the worst production I've been to in my entire life. I went there with my best friend, who's much more libertarian than I am, expecting to see a pretty normie-friendly take on conservative issues, but I came out of it feeling kinda dirty. To start with, the show was slated to start at 7:30, and right about then an announcement came over the intercom letting us know that the show would actually be starting at 8. Now, for me that wasn't an issue, but I really felt for the pain for the poor guy next to us, as his wife was pissed at him for choosing such a poor venue for their date night. Luckily, I was able to calm her down a bit, but I can't blame her that much considering that the lowest possible cost for tickets to see this production was $65 after fees. Every ticket did come with a signed book though, so if you think that was a good deal, I guess you got your money's worth. Thinking about it though, that probably was just a way to get his book sales a little bit further up the New York Times bestseller list. Eventually though, him and his entourage did show up, starting out the night with his guest Benny Johnson. Now, Benny, if you don't know, is one of those guys who kinda came out of nowhere, pushed by Conservative Inc. to be the in-house Zoomer and meme smith, which everybody thinks is just a cringy answer to the young right-wing America First movement started by Nick Fuentes. There's a lot of story behind that, but it's not really important to this video. Suffice it to say that he's the face for all of the old boomer neocons attempting to fit in and make the younger generation think that there's something cool about their particular brand of kosher conservatism. The problem is that the boomers grew up in a wonderful country and kind of ruined it without realizing it, so it was simple to push them into being war hawks or vote to spend money nation building everywhere but here, whereas with the generations of millennials and zoomers, we know how fucked everything is, and that makes it much more difficult to throw the American flag on top of whatever pet project you have and call it conservative. Funny enough, that's also the problem I see Dave running into. While he still calls himself a classical liberal, he's obviously trying to inculcate himself into the conservative groups in Florida, and it came through sounding really weird. Benny Johnston and Rubin both push this message hard. They'd say something like, you guys are really the people who saved this state. Give yourself a round of applause. And then they would move on to talking about how Florida needs to close its borders and keep anyone from blue states out. Rubin especially would continuously make claims about the people of Florida and how we don't care about gay marriage, which is ironic. Weren't you in California, Dave? How could you possibly know if Floridian conservatives still care about the sanctity of marriage? By your own admission, whatever else right-wing Floridians have been doing has kept the state sane. What if one of those things was like viciously fighting to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges? Well, Dave Rubin said it, and he does live in Florida, so it has to be true, right? This is the exact pattern of diluting the conservative message that led us down the slippery slope we continue to go down in places like California. As a matter of fact, when real Floridians talk about keeping people from blue states out, we don't really care so much about your normal, everyday liberal voter. Their minds can be changed. What we care about is people like Joe Rogan, people like you, Dave, who come in and spout their opinions off about abortion or gay marriage, attempting to gaslight us into thinking that we never cared about that subject in the first place, trying to make us think that conservatism has moved past its old ways and the new conservatives are basically 90s liberals. I have a secret for you, Dave. Conservatism is about conserving. We don't move past the old ways. Just because your party has moved insanely to the left doesn't mean that you can come and pretend that our party is anything other than what it is, which is an unabashedly Christian, white, and male. Any attempt to water down this message is an attack on the groups who you claim to have saved this state from certain destruction. Now, if this seems a bit overly paranoid, you should know that Dave has a history of being dishonest with those who put their trust in him. In 2019, there was a bit of an uproar when Sargon of Akkad and Lauren Southern were kicked off of Patreon for their actions that they took outside of the platform. This really freaked people out because back then a lot of the right-wing pundits relied on Patreon for the majority of their income. So Jordan Peterson decided to stick to his principles and leave the platform from which he was bringing in 6 figures monthly. And this was such a strong middle finger to the machine that Rubin decided to jump in and cancel his Patreon as well. Immediately afterwards, Rubin began setting up his new alternative to Patreon, called Locals. He went personally to people he knew to tell them to get on his platform, because with Dave in charge, you would never have to worry about getting your income stream banned for just saying things people don't like. He emailed people like Michael Malice and Andy Ngo and presented them with this offer, and many people accepted. It made sense. It was like Patreon, but instead of a nameless, faceless group of people moderating content, Dave put his name and his face and his reputation onto it. And why wouldn't you use it when the only person who could ban you was just a phone call away? He promised that with him in this position of power, the people who use this service would never again feel the pain of losing all their subscribers and income. Well, unfortunately, their trust in him was misplaced, because only 18 months after starting this company, he abruptly sold the entire company to Rumble. I think Ian Bremmer and Tim Pool from Timcast IRL put it perfectly with this bit to sum up just how disgusting this bait and switch was to people on the inside.
The consolidation of corporate power is often done with good intentions. Dave Rubin sold you out. He got a bunch of big popular people in there by using his personal brand and his trust, and then he sold you out. He made, I don't know, they haven't released how much money he got paid to sell you out, but he is a...
Well, what do you mean by sell them?
I mean that he just got paid a lot of money and got an offer he couldn't refuse to give now control of all these people trusted Dave. They trusted you.
Right.
And now they have no choice but to be owned. Their data is now owned by Rumble. This is what Google bought YouTube. I remember that happening in 2008.
That's why I'm not a fan of it.
Michael Malice, Dave sold you out, dude. I hope that you got paid for this too, Mike. I hope that all the people on Locals got a percentage of this buyout, because it's your data that was sold. So I am open to following this. I'm really going to in the next coming weeks, because I want to know all the terms of the contract that are going to be as much as possibly publicly available, because maybe the people are going to make out like bandits on this as well as Dave. But Dave, I had a lot of faith in you, and I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I thought you were going to hold on to Locals for the next 20 or 30 years and really do this, at least try and do it right. This is devastating to me.
if the idea of locals was that you would control your own community, but that Dave could then sell your community to somebody else, completely undercuts what I guess the story was supposed to be. I don't want someone to be like, hey, I'm running a service. If you use it, I guarantee you X. And then I'll say, oh, okay, great. Like you said, oh, Dave's going to own this forever. I trust him. And then he sells it. And now you don't know who you're answering to. Now you don't know what terms will change. And they could. I don't like the idea that your income, your subscribers, your fans can be sold to someone else.
Now, in the interest of transparency, I did have to cut that up a bit. So for the full context, the clip is in the description below. Putting that aside, apart from the insidious nature of his messaging, it was really just a bad production altogether. The late opening was one thing. Apparently he went to the wrong theater. But when it was all over, I was left wondering what exactly was I paid for? His charming smile and personality? Benny opened for roughly half an hour making cringy Trump jokes before Dave came on stage, who had a short monologue akin to maybe a comedy bit. That's understandable since Dave started out as a comedian, but really the only jokes that got any laughter were about him being gay or Florida being awesome, which our half-full auditorium of boomers just ate up. After about 10 minutes of that, he moved swiftly onto the main portion of the evening, which was, get this, answering audience questions that had been asked via his data mining website before the show started. I myself work in production for a large television station, and when I think about how little work actually went into doing this, I almost feel insulted. The question he spent the most time on was a fuck, marry, kill segment, for crying out loud. Since I was there, I know he had better audience questions than the one he decided to answer, having put in a few myself, but no, he had to focus on the least interesting ones, like whether Michelle Obama would be running for president, or if he would rather fuck Pete Buttigieg or Jen Psaki. This show honestly would have been better off in the library circuit, where I've also seen better. I feel like if he was really trying to get his message out and change public opinion, he would have made the tickets free in order to sell the book, not triple the cost of the book and give them away with the ticket. I enjoyed myself because I was hanging with my friend, but to be honest, he and I probably could have been having more fun if we were hanging around a burning trash heap in the southeast end of Jerusalem. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I was him, I'd be ecstatic too, looking out on all those dollar steins in their seats, and if I could get past my overly inflated sense of self-esteem, believing I actually had something of value that these people ought to pay to hear. But even then, I'm weighing the time given he posts so many long-winded repeats on social media. Near the 1 hour 15-minute mark, he mentioned that someone off stage told him he could only take one more question, which I find weird considering it's his show. Then the lights went up and we were ushered out into the lobby. Now, me and my buddy decided to hang around and see if we could get a chance to maybe say hello or take a picture or something. But apparently there were tickets that costed an extra $20 in order to have a meet and greet with him at the end. It reminded me much more of a Comic-Con where people pay stupid money for celebrity autographs, and while that's fine and all, I was under the impression that this was meant to have a bit more serious of an impact on society. Really, though, I just have an impression of complete apathy on his part. There was no real effort there, just someone showing up to collect the money from the poor fools who think they'll actually affect positive change here and not just run the circuit, attempting to fleece every penny he possibly can out of the hardworking individuals who took the time to see him. There was nothing of substance, nothing of interest, nothing in what he said that hasn't been stated and restated by him and 1,000 other cookie-cutter conservative commentators. And then at the end, instead of coming out and seeing how many people might want to shake hands, he decides you aren't worth speaking to if you didn't pay the extra shekels. I mean, does he really think we're that easy? Are we that easy? A general feeling of disrespect for his audience and the lack of show preparation, and then pay up or no handshake. Again, I don't really care whether or not I got to see him, but it was just weirdly unpleasant. Very much like meeting a prostitute, but more expensive. I have to say, if he thinks this is the right way to treat his YouTube audience just because he can get away with it and a portion of people will pay whatever he wants while the disadvantaged others are left out, feels like total hypocrisy. And I have to say, I'm kind of glad he's in Miami, far away from the actual conservative centers of Florida that he claims to love so much. Anyways, I hope that gave you something to think about. My name's Jim, and if you think this video was worth it, you can subscribe to me below. Please hit a comment, and if you think that my content is actually valuable, feel free to visit me on Locals or Patreon or any of the alternatives below or my website linked in the description. Well, thanks for listening, guys. I hope that gave you an idea, and don't go see this show. Unless the guest is somebody you really, really want to see, it's going to be a really half-assed production. Anyways, guys, I'll be talking to you later. Peace.